Howdy, this is going to be a quick down and dirty, sort of hopefully one-take run of doing animation setup for Arma Reforger. This is being done based off the idea that you've already gone through the wiki pages that are available for animation and asset creation. So you've already got your weapon in the game, you've got the prefab set up, you're now just over to the animation side of things. So provided you've gone through and followed the wiki so far, you'll likely have, hopefully, your animation workspace set up in Blender. So obviously you've got your weapon put in, attached to the prop right bone, the magazine attached to the prop left bone, etc., etc. So once that's all in, we'll hop back over to the workbench. So when you go into the animation editor up the top here, uh, you may have already had this set up, but just in case, I'll just run through quickly what everything does. So the wiki instructs that you just duplicate existing animation files. The AK-74 is best if you're just doing like a rifle-y based weapon for now. So you just duplicate the AGF file, the AGR, the AST, the animation workspace as well, which is going to be how you open it up into the editor. And then you've got the player and weapon ASIs. So let's go through what they are really quick and how they all work. So we'll start at the top of the workspace list here. So you have the AST file, which is the template file, and that effectively just lays out these columns and rows here. Now that will automatically get updated and added if you create that file and then build it through here. So for example, if I go here, I can rename the group, I can add new rows and new columns, and that will update that file as long as it's a duplicated file. You can see here for this weapon, I'm just using the AK-74 because we didn't have a need to change it. I'm not going to be editing any of those for the time being. In future, I can always just duplicate it and then reassign that file here, although you can't do it in this menu. You actually have to go into your folder and you have to open up the AST file and you can edit the configs in there. But the wiki does explain doing that. But for the time being, the template file, all of this is fine because I'm still copying the layout of the AK-74, so I don't need to worry about it. Moving down, you then have animation instances. So these are what control the animations for the player character themselves and the weapon. They are segmented. It's not like probably what a lot of view model animators are used to, where they just use one rig. Well, normally they are separated, but some people might be used to just using one rig for both the character and the weapon. In Arma, that's not how it works. They are animated independently, and they run, hopefully, side by side, provided nothing's gone wrong. So you can see here we have the player ASI and the weapon ASI. So obviously, if I go up to the top here, you can see when I have the player ASI selected, it's got all these little green orbs and all of these different named actions. So for example, if I go to the reload section, that's the kind of main focus of this video. You'll see there are loads of rows and a bunch of columns. So there are two columns in this instance. There is ERC and PNE, erect and prone. Obviously, that just corresponds to the different versions of the animation, one being while standing, one being while prone. Crouch, I don't think any weapon in the vanilla game currently has independent animations for crouch, but some weapons definitely might warrant it, and you can always do it yourself if you want to. But that's a lot of extra work, which for the time being, just getting your weapon set up and animated in the game, you won't need. So you've got all of these orbs that are all in different animations. So you can see when I click on them, there is this file path here at the top left that's changing based on what I click on. So that's obviously different animations, and you can see it's going between erect and prone there because there's two different animations. And you'll see before them they have this little P underscore rifle. That's the name format that the game follows, and it's quite helpful to follow it as well for your modded stuff just to keep things clean. The P obviously stands for player in this instance, whereas if I go to the top here now and then switch to weapon ASI, you'll notice that now changes to W underscore rifle. So that is to mark out that obviously one is for player, one is for weapon. It can be very easy to accidentally export animations with the wrong one of these and then get lost trying to find why your animation isn't working. So always double check if you're importing and something's not working that your export in Blender is not got the wrong name selected. So as you can see here, just going back to the player real quick, in my little preview window over here, if I click through the animations, he will start doing different things. And then if I go down to the preview models here, I can select the weapon and then go to the weapon ASI and check the animations there as well. Now, these preview models, when you have the actual player selected, you can see the weapon is here. And if you look at this little list, you can see I've actually got my model set up here on the anim test character to see, have them show up here. So when I'm actually doing my animation, I get a bit of a better reference on what's going on. For this weapon in particular, it's set up to have a lot of different pieces. So obviously on the test character, it's got the stock and the handguard and everything. If I just do the weapon itself, it's just this bare bones version. Briefly, just very briefly, if you need to set this up yourself, when you have the anim test character, which you should do if you duplicated the AK-74 workspace, you can then add a child model, and then once you add that, you can then go into here and you can select the bone that it's attaching to. So in this instance, the right-hand prop, just like hopefully your Blender file is set up, magazine for the left-hand prop, and then you can see here that I have my actual weapon part set up. So it's attached to the right-hand prop, and it's the child of the scene root, but I have adjusted the offset position so they move. So you can just see it, so they stock just vanished off the gun. But yeah, I've updated it so they move, and now it won't come back for some reason. Great. So that's if you just need to set up a more complicated weapon model, at least to see it as you would in game a bit more. So that's the ASI files. They control the actual animations themselves, which ones are actually being played and used. And the template is what keeps track of all of these rows and columns that the animations go into. Moving down, you then have the graph. Now, this in the bottom right here is the animation graph. I'm not going to explain this here, mainly for the fact that A, it's very complicated already, and B, I still don't properly understand it. I've only done very few things with it, like doing a HK slap on MP5. But unfortunately, it's one of the most undocumented pieces of the animation editor at the moment. So we'll hopefully in some time soon see a video especially focusing on it and more wiki pages for how it all works. But effectively, it's a visual kind of scripting thing, if I'm getting my term right there. So you've got all these different nodes and boxes. Inside all those nodes and boxes, you have all of these categories and the properties you can fill out and change. They all do different things. For now, I would just use the vanilla graph. It's worth duplicating it just so you can edit it if you need to. But for now, yeah, it should just work. You can use a vanilla graph depending on your weapon. If you have like a belt-fed machine gun, you can use the PKMs or the M249, etc., etc. You won't need to write your own. These are very complicated, and messing them up can break your gun, not just the animations. So for the time being, I ignore that. I just duplicate it, and you can assign it in here under graph when you right-click and assign existing graph. Next, you have controls. That shouldn't need a dedicated file. That should hopefully be assigned automatically when you do the graph and the AGF file. And that brings me to the file section where you have the AGF file itself. If I remember correctly, which I don't, that's why I'm checking, AGF, that does handle a lot of node related stuff, and then the actual AGR file itself, I won't lie, I can't remember exactly what the two differences are between them, and I'm on time pressure here to not go through it now. But effectively, you have an AGR file, which is the overview of the graph, and then you have the AGF inside of that. And then once you assign that, it should automatically generate the sheets file down here, which then you can just double click on and have the graph show up, and you can then edit. So that's those. Event table, sync table, and expression table. You shouldn't need those unless you're doing something a lot more complex like locomotion, like character locomotion. So that's for helping set up things like when the feet land on the ground and when to loop the animation, etc., etc. So for normal reloads for weapons, you won't need that. And then you have the preview models as mentioned earlier. So that's just so I can see the different things that I'm animating. And then you finally have audio testing. So if you assign your audio files in here for how your weapon is set up, if you have the sound editor open, as you do the playback for the animation, all the sound you have set up should play mostly in real time. It's not the best way to debug it, but it's a good way to get a general feel for where your sounds are. But it will play off the sound events you have in your little timeline here, which probably is a good way to segue onto animation events. So provided you are at least using for now as a template the existing animations, every animation has events set up which sort of tell the game what certain things do. So for example, you can see here you've got detach magazine, mag release, blend out, weapon despawn magazine, and you have a little sound there as well. So weapons and players have individual events because you're using different animations, and those animations are saved. Those events are saved on the animation. Um, so if you set it up in one workspace and for some reason you're doing the same animation on a different weapon, um, those events will carry over. Um, which is normally why you want to set up separate files if you need to change timings and things for different weapons. Um, but those animations, those events are fairly straightforward. So you've got detach magazine. So that is when the magazine itself is going to unparent from the weapon. And what I mean by that is, for those who don't know, when it's parented to a weapon, it's snapped into a slot. So for example, hopefully you set up your weapon in Blender already, and you'll probably remember that you went through the step to do the constraint to snap the prop right to the slot magazine bone. If I turn that off, obviously the magazine, as you can see, is moving. So that's the same way it works in game. So the slot magazine event is what dictates the magazine disconnecting from the gun in game and allowing the prop left to be loose, so it can be animated. So you can obviously animate the mag being taken away. Mag release, I'm not actually entirely sure. I think that dictates in game the second you have mag release. If you then jump, for example, and interrupt the animation, the game will then have been told, right, the mag release has been pressed, there shouldn't be a mag anymore. As far as I know, that's what that event's for. I don't think there's any documentation that specifies it, but I think that's what it is. Normally, I just tend to make sure the mag release is either on or before the detached magazine action, but I don't think it's massively vital if it's wrong. But just in case, do it just before. And then you have here, for example, blend out and weapon despawn magazine. Despawn magazine just makes it disappear. So if you obviously, when you have the hand animated to put the mag in a pouch, it will then disappear from the hand. And then if I go to the insert mag, for example, there will be a weapon spawn magazine, which will then spawn it so it can be visible again, and then obviously picked up and everything. The animation will still play if you haven't spawned it in. It's just the mag will be invisible until you do. So it's generally best to have the weapon spawn magazine, ideally when the hand is sort of maybe a little bit concealed. For example, I do it when the hand is in a magazine pouch. So if I can actually get it to play. So my despawn happens here, which when he's wearing the webbing in game, it's hidden, so you can't see it happen. Um, so that's what Spawn Magazine in does. Let's see what else. You have a lot of them for various different situations. So for example, reload action bolt, you have weapon rack bolt, weapon enable fire. So if you cancel the animation, for example, here at frame 45, the game now knows that those things have actually been done. So you won't need to play, or you shouldn't need to play the whole animation again, as far as I'm aware. As soon as those events are done, that's it. The state of the weapon has then been registered of, oh yeah, it's been cocked. It can now fire. So you won't need to do the whole rack bolt animation again. And then you have a bunch of other sound cues. Effectively, the best way to learn this is to look at the vanilla animations. You can also copy those events over from vanilla animations. So you don't need to sit there and manually, input them yourselves. And I'll quickly just show that as well, just because I originally didn't realize either. But Workbench allows you to have two animation editors open at once. I'm assuming partly in reason for this purpose. So what you can do is you can open up, for example, if I go to the AK-74 animation workspace, you can see I can't edit anything in here because it's locked because it's a vanilla game file. But what you can do is if I go to the player ASI here and I go to the insert mag, for example, over here in the bottom left or wherever you have the little properties panel, because you can change the workspace, you'll see all of these events. Now, you can select these, even though you can't edit them, you can select them, go to the top up here. I don't think Control-C actually works, but go to the top up here, and then there's the copy button, and then you can go back over to your editor, and then if you just click on events there, you'll get the option to paste. Now, obviously, it's going to look weird here because I'm applying lots of events on top of other events, but you can see you can paste in those animations. Those events, sorry, and they should retain their timing on the timeline. So, for example, if there was an action happening on that animation that's happening at frame, 2, 6, and 5, or 10, sorry, they should copy over and match those. If your animation is the same length, then ideal, you won't have to adjust it. If it's not the same length, or your animation differs in some way, when it's actually timed to, for example, in this instance, rack the bolt, you're just going to want to adjust those. And you can do that by double clicking and just moving it on the line. And it will tell you what frame you're dropping it on. You can also do multiple at once and move them, together. But that is pretty much the low down and dirty on events. They are very important. Your gun will not work if you don't have them. And probably the last thing I can think of for events that's actually quite important to know is that some events, I think, as far as I know, they're needed on both the player and weapon side of things. So you'll see here, if I go to insert mag, you'll see here I've got on frame 18 weapon spawn magazine. Now if I switch to weapon ASI, it should automatically select the insert magazine animation again, which it has. It's just in the weapon side of things. And now you can see here at frame 18 I've got the weapon spawn magazine again. Some of them need to be, I think, the same on both the weapon and the player. I've never tried without, just because it's easier for me to just copy them onto both. But as far as I know, they're needed on both player and weapon animations. Not all of them I should know. It just seems to be certain ones, especially if it's a weapon function. So, mag release, rack bolt. It's just good practice to have to copy them over as you do from a vanilla example. Moving on from that, so that's the events done. So they are vital, you need them. Moving back to the weapons, and back to all of the orbs again. So these are pretty much all the ones you can see here, I would say, are required for the weapon to work properly. It doesn't mean you have to make every single individual one bespoke. That's obviously the ideal, but realistically it's not necessarily practical for lots of people, which is completely understandable because animations take time. So you can make use of quite a lot of existing animations for your weapon, unless you drastically differ from like the hand pose, for example. You should be able to make use of existing animations. The ones you kind of need to have bespoke, which you should have if you followed the tutorial so far and made an IK animation, is, for example, the IK offset and the safety. Those are going to control some pretty important things, as are the idle finger and idle animation. You can see here the little file browser address at the top here. My idle finger is different, but my idle normal pose is the same animation as the safety. So you can reuse and make use of this, the same animation in different slots. But just as a really quick rundown of kind of what those do, in this instance, the idle pose is dictating the, if I remember correctly, because I don't have the export profiles to hand, it's dictating the angle of the hand in this instance. So when you lower the weapon, if I had the wrong pose selected in here, that it was doing something else with the right hand. When I lowered the weapon in game, for example, you can see here the left hand is grabbing onto the gun where it should. If it was the other way, if I had the wrong idle animation selected, the right hand might be angled at a different angle, and the weapon wouldn't be resting in the hands as you can see here. It would probably be, all wonky and not look right. So the idle animation especially is a important one to have, because you will then have other problems if you don't. And yeah, the little easy trick here is you can just use the safety animation again, which if you look through the vanilla weapon examples, you'll see these kind of similar tricks being repeated. Some of them have lots of bespoke made ones, other ones just reuse them. So it's always good to just check the vanilla Bohemia ones and go from there if you need sort of guidance. Finger trigger in and out, again, this one not actually vital, because this animation should only be exporting this finger, so the hand isn't being affected to alter the orientation of the weapon. So as you can see, he's doing this T pose, and that's because this animation is using an export profile that is literally just using, well, in this instance using the hand and finger, but it just needs to use the index finger. So this is not vital. You can make use of a vanilla animation here to save having to make one yourself. Fire, the same again, just using the index finger, so you can also just make use of an existing animation if you need to. It might look a little bit silly because the finger might not be correctly pressing the trigger or whatever, but if you're just trying to get a weapon in and the main animations made custom, then you can skip a lot of these. But if you want your gun to look and feel the best, then having these all set up individually is a massive boost to the quality. Idle finger is just, if I do the finger out animation here, that's the position it's going into. So that's just where the finger will rest when your weapon is lowered here, like it is now. So you can see the finger is just there on the outside of the trigger guard on the magwell. And it goes back in, and that's playing the finger in and out animation. So that's how that works. IK offset, if you've done your importing and setting up the IK pose through the wiki tutorial, that is just an important offset pose to make sure your IK is working correctly. What you can also do in the editor, because you don't have the IK pose actively running, if I run my insert mag animation, you'll see he's facing this odd angle. That's because the IK pose, the offset, they're not running at the same time here in the preview editor like they would in the game. So for example, if I just quickly reload in the game, you can see my animation isn't off to the side, it's just still facing forwards as I animated it. So to have that show up properly, if you go to the offset, there you go, he's facing, that's the IK pose. If I right click it and set that as the base for previewing, now when I play any of my animations, it will be like it's playing sort of in, the live game preview. So he'll be facing the right way and everything. One important thing to note is that these animations, what you see in the live preview here in the world editor is very different. Well, it's quite different to what you're seeing here in the animation editor, and that's because when the game's actually playing, if I real quick just go into the live debug and I attach the debug to the character, you can see here he's starting to breathe and move and everything. If I go down to the animation graph, you can see this red line follows down and is showing animations that are currently active. So if I go down just here, you can see, for example, the bolt closed animation is actively playing on this weapon, because that's playing on the weapon side of things. And then if I go along and go down, there is the semi pose, so that's for the safety. But then I've also got the idle pose running here, right? So that's just what this position sort of is, the idle pose. It's where the fingers position and everything, because that's the finger on trigger animation, which I'm messing that up there. But what I'm getting at here is that all of these things are running at once. By default, that's not happening in the animation editor. When you're playing an animation like this by just double clicking on the orbs to preview, you're playing just that animation. So you're not getting a lot of those extra effects. Like for example, he's not breathing when it's playing or anything like that, because those are all animations that are layered on top of each other. So it's always best when you're doing your animation work, hop in the actual preview and just check and make sure things are playing as they should be, and as you've animated them, because there may be times where you set something up in the animation editor and it looks fine, or it looks one way, and then it might appear differently when you're actually previewing and what it will look like when you're playing the normal game. So yeah, always make sure you have the world editor open if you can, just obviously on this screen, because when you change your animations, things won't update if you're actively previewing. So just hop back out, hop back in again. It will say in the bottom right that something animations have been imported, and then you can check again and see if things are playing right as they should. So that is the IK offset and IK animation, sort of brief description of how it all works. You've then got sort of the main animations that you're going to be looking for, which is the insert and remove mag and the rack bolt. And then you've got safety, which, as we said earlier on, is sort of just one of the important poses you need for setting up the weapon, and that's just going to help also dictate the orientation of the hand, which then will dictate where the weapon points, because the weapon itself, the prop right that the weapon is attached to, is parented to the hand. This is quite an important thing because it's caused some problems with certain weapons because of how this system works. Long story short, if you're doing anything that requires the right hand, you need to keep in mind that any drastic movement is going to cause the gun to jitter, because the weapon is trying to follow the right hand when it can. This is why you won't see a lot of weapons using the right hand for animations, save for very few. The M60 and the PKM is 2, for example, where the right hand is used to rack the bolt. Whereas, for example, on the M16, where you would in real life probably use your right hand, it uses the left because it doesn't have this issue. And the reason why that's happening, in a very basic way, and probably because I don't understand it 100%, well, I do understand it, but I'm probably not explaining it the best. But the weapon is parented to the right hand. Anytime the right hand is moved away from the uh, prop bone, which is attached to the hand, the game is calculating the offset between them. Unfortunately, it's not perfect. So if you do really drastic movements like rotating the hand, um, you'll see the gun start to jitter as it tries to rotate and follow, and then goes, "Oh no, I should be offsetting and not following that position." Sadly, this potentially is not going to be changed for Reforger. It's probably going to be an Arma 4 change. So I would just say if you're doing any weapon that requires the right hand to be used for something, in the animation itself. Like, for example, you want to animate using the dominant hand to remove the magazine. I would advise against it where you can, because that jitter is incredibly hard to mitigate. So far, we haven't found a possible way to completely solve it. That may change later on if you view this video in future, but we haven't found an ideal way to try and counteract it and stop it and solve it. So just keep in mind, where possible, try keep the right hand connected to the gun, for example, the pistol grip here, when possible, and do all your animations with the left hand. But yeah, sorry, that's a little bit of a tangent. That's the safety animation. It's helping orientate the right hand and make sure that plays properly. The sight, it's not actually relevant for the player animations. That's entirely weapon side, but that will just animate the sight moving on the gun. So there you go. And you just do one frame for each movement and it will blend for you in between them. But that's for setting your different elevation. And then you have, back to the test character again. I'll just reset the offset back for previewing again. Then you have the switch mode on and off. So this one took me a little while to understand. You have switch mode, dep off and on. So dep is deployment. And the reason why they're separate is if you see the switch mode here, you can see I'm moving the gun when the animation is played. On the dep version of it, the gun isn't moving at all, it's just the hand. So dep, the deployment version, you don't want to be moving the hand because of how the deployment is working. It's using a lot of inverse kinematic animation to obviously keep the gun connected to whatever you're deployed on. So the second you start moving the gun in the animation, you'll get weird jittering. So for the dep animations, you can keep the like finger movement, but you don't want to be moving the hand or the weapon, the prop bone at all. You want to cut that movement out and just have, for example, the fingers moving, because it's also not very noticeable when you're deployed anyway. But then when you go to the switch mode on/off, the non-dep versions, you can have weapon movement, hand rotation, and everything to play. You can set these up quite easily in Blender. You can just go to your animation and just select, for example, the hand, and you can just duplicate your fire mode switch animation. So build the normal animation first, and then duplicate it, and then for the dep version, the deployed version, you can just delete the keyframes for the hand and weapon movement. And that's a real quick way you can set those up. Alternatively, you can also just set a blank animation in space of those. So you could, for example, use the safety animation again. That's obviously just keeping the hand still. So you can just reuse that animation again without having to actually make a separate one if you don't want to. But it does help for that one player that might occasionally look down and see his hand when he's doing a fire mode switch whilst deployed. He might see it and appreciate it. And then finally, you have trigger. As far as I know, I think, yeah, trigger is just a weapon-specific animation one, so that will just animate the trigger moving. If you want to actually animate the finger moving when you're firing, you have the actual fire animation just there, right at the top. That should be a really brief rundown of pretty much what all those animations do. Keep in mind that they all have different events, as mentioned earlier, so you can just copy those from the existing vanilla weapons to get an idea of how things work. one quick way to copy those over instead of having them opened on a separate animation editor window is if you've duplicated everything over and you've got, for example, your weapon and it's you've duplicated it so it's got all the AK animations already set up. You can import your animation. That's done, by the way, by going up to the three little dots here, or you can browse as well. But I just find it easier to go into this menu. You'll see your animations. Now, when you import them for the first time, they're not going to have any event data assigned to them, so these timelines will just be blank. But because you also have the prone version, now this is something to take with a pinch of salt because the timing will vary, but the prone version should have the exact same events. They'll just be timed in different areas on the timeline. You can go to the prone version, copy the events from there, if you've still got the vanilla animation assigned in the prone slot, and then go back to your animation and then paste the events over. And then you'll just need to double check that the timings, match up with your animation. So, for example, when he racks the bolt in the animation, make sure the rack bolt event is played, etc., etc. So that is how you can sort of do the events quite easily. That's sort of the main rundown of the setup and what the different files do. What sort of everything on this screen here means in the workspace, how the events work. In the properties tab, you do have a bunch of other tabs down the bottom you can go through. Controls is your variables for the weapon. So provided you've done the prefab setup and everything, you've copied over you duplicated the animation files from vanilla weapons. These should already be all set up. You shouldn't need to really adjust them. These sort of come into play when you want to do things like adding bipods to weapons or adding custom variables. So I didn't need to do it when I did my MP5, but for example, if you did a HK slap, I guess you could make a variable that says, bolt open and bolt closed. And then you can have it so it checks those to make sure. And you can then use, in the graph here, you can use programming language in things like the condition. Here it's checking for the variable, and you can put in your custom ones. But for now, you won't need to worry about those unless you're doing some super fancy specific thing. You've then got properties, which obviously I showed you earlier on, which has all the information in for the nodes, for example. Debug controls, I'm not sure. I've not used it. File browser is obviously a file browser. If you need to, for some reason, copy your animation over, instead of having to do that, this little menu I showed you earlier on, you can actually click on the little magnifying glass here, and it will find that animation in the asset browser, and you can just drag it on and assign it to, a different slot here. Live debug is a very important one. This is going to be how you're going to, hopefully diagnose a lot of problems. Because I have the live preview running here, if I Alt-Tab and go back to the animation editor, so as it's still running, you can see these different things changing in the debug. It can be a little bit confusing at times because they're not properly named, and if you have, for example, a bunch of AI in your scene or a bunch of weapons in your scene, they'll all show up here too. There might be a way to actually name them in the scene so they show up differently here, but I'm not actually sure. But you can see I have unknown and then character. So character obviously is the player. If I attach it, sometimes it won't attach straight away. Just try clicking the button or double clicking for it to properly attach. You can see things just changed here, and you can see the timeline is now running. You can see the time in the top left here, where all this little debug information is now ticking up as well. And you can see my character is breathing and doing all these things. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to, but I'll give it a try. If I move that to my other window. So I am now looking around in the preview. And obviously, it's now mirroring one-to-one and debugging and showing you in real time what is happening. So for example, I'm going to hit reload. It's going to play the reload animation. Now I'll shoot. You won't see the bolt move, but if I was debugging the weapon, you'd see the bolt move. So this is how you just check and make sure and see what's actually happening when these things are all going on. So once you've done that, you can hit detach, and this is now saved effectively like a little replay reel of everything you just did. Don't click on any animations, don't double click on any nodes or anything because it might end up then stopping. But you can see if I scroll through, one thing to note, it plays in really fast time. Even if you adjust the timing here, for some reason it plays back in super speed. Just something to note. But you can see when things are happening now, if you watch the graphs, just very basically you can see where the things are highlighted. When I do things like the reload, you can see how that then works on the graph. So you can see it goes down the reload node here in this state machine, down through this blend, through this other state machine that's specifying the stance, and then into the reload state machine. And you can see in real time, if I slowly scroll through, how it's flowing through those different actions. So you can see you've got the in and out timing. So that's how long the thing is actually running and playing for. That's how you can work out timings if you need to edit things in the graph itself, but you probably won't need to do that for now unless you're doing something a bit more advanced and complex. But you can see, yeah, that's the mag in animation being done. Sorry, mag out being animation being done, then the mag in. So you can see it's flowing through here into this little source animation, which is the insert mag animation. And that's now ticking down for the insert mag node. So that's it running and telling the game, right, it's doing the insert mag. Then once that's finished, you'll see that it will then, this will start to go, all checkered, because that's now blending back out. It's going back up through here, back up through this buffer, and then into the idle animation again. So you can see it's blending now, and then into idle, back to normal. That's sort of a brief rundown of how the debugging works. And to note, you can also do this for the weapon itself. So the unknown will be the weapon. So very quickly, just as a demonstration, I will connect the live debug there. Oop. There you go, that's now running live debug. So if I shoot, bolt move, it's the same as I was showing earlier on with the difference between the player and the weapon ASI. Just like that, you have a separate debug for the weapon and the player character. So that's a good way you can debug your weapons. And the same thing, you can see what's happening. You can see where it's doing those animations still again, but especially for the weapon as well. And as I said, because the weapons, because the animations in a lot of instances are done for both. So for example, insert mag, there is the player version of the animation, and then there's the weapon version of the animation. You'll see them both running in real time. And then when they go down to things like the semi-pose node, for example, it will say underneath reload.safety. So reload is specifying the group. So here in the top left, you've obviously got the drop-down tab for reload. And then you have the safety bit. That's the actual name of the animation in the file. So for example, I have one in this instance assigned to the weapon safety, and I have one assigned to the player safety. That is just playing the animation for both here. You can, I think, separate them by using, programming and conditions and stuff. I can't say for 100% sure, but I think you can. But I, at the moment, can't think of a use case where you need that. So that's how live debug works. It's very useful if something is going wrong. For example, the one downside you have from duplicating vanilla assets is if they ever update them, yours will not automatically update. The only way to do that is to keep the vanilla things, for example. So, I mean, a safe one to be is if you really don't need to, you don't need to duplicate the graph unless you're really planning on changing something, because then when the game updates, any changes made to the graph, which is obviously the most complicated bit, will then automatically use the new version. So you should avoid any problems. As soon as you duplicate the graph, you lose that. So if you ever have any problems and you have duplicated the graph for whatever reason, you can just compare between the two different weapons. You can, live debug first, see where something's getting hung up, and then you can adjust it. One example I can use, for example, is I think fairly recently here on this queue node, there's this new on queue method that's either completely new or it's only started being used. And I had an issue where my firing animation wasn't properly working, and it turned out it's because this on queue method was different to the newly updated vanilla weapons. So all I needed to do was just hop into the live debug on my weapon, see where it was getting stuck. I then compared it to live debugging a vanilla weapon and then saw how it was working. I tracked down, where it was flowing through and getting stuck, and then I discovered it was this queue node. And I just did a little bit of comparing between all of this information on the left here, and then discovered that yes, the on queue method was different to the vanilla weapon. So there's just an example of how you can use live debug to diagnose problems. There is also the what's it called? I can't remember the term for it for some reason. Breakpoint. At one point in time, I did play around with this and I used it a few times, but I haven't used it in such a long time I've forgotten. So apologies. But as far as I know, you can set the breakpoint on one of these nodes. And when you live debug, I think it will stop when it hits that node. and you can set it up so if you're trying to diagnose where a problem is happening, I think, don't quote me on it, you can set multiple breakpoints and you can see where it stops, see if the error is happening. It will then flow through to the next one, stop, etc., etc. But yeah, if you need information help on breakpoints, don't use this video as an example because I probably just explained that completely wrong. But I think that's how it works. I just don't. I haven't used it that often because I haven't run into any major errors where it's shown up. Um, that is live debug, attachment debug. I have not actually used. I think you can use it. Uh, I think it's similar to uh, when you're debugging the weapon, except you can do it to position attachments, I believe, but I'm not sure. I've not used it. Errors shows you things that are going wrong. You'll probably sometimes have things like source columns not matching. I think even the vanilla weapons have that to some extent, so you don't have to worry about those. The main ones you have to look out for is when like a big X comes up, or if you preview the game and it just crashes. That's when there's problems. It will tell you if you have a custom graph, for example, or even if the vanilla graph breaks at any point. Uh, it will tell you if there's an error somewhere with a big X over these nodes. For example, if I just change the syntax here, will it do it? No, it won't do it. I need to change on something there you go. So if I delete this bracket, we get this big red X show up telling you that there's something wrong. And it's probably going to crash if you try and then preview with that happening. I'm actually scared to open the preview now just in case it might actually crash. That is pretty much, I say that, and it's currently at 41 minutes and 30 seconds. That's pretty much the animation that's really quickly gone through. For actually doing your animations, you've more than likely, hopefully, done the IK animation import already. Now, this really is a separate video because it really relies now on us actually having knowledge of animation. It's not something you're going to do quickly. Please keep that in mind. I'm, I'm not great at, perfect at it. I've spent pretty much a year now, actually. It's January 2024 I started doing view model stuff, and then I think it was in like March I started playing around on Arma. But it's gonna take time. Animations is one of the longest forms of sort of time for uh, reward ratio, I guess. You could spend hours on an animation that's 4 seconds long. Um, it's quite brutal in that regard. That's just the way it is. So just the best way you can work at it in the quickest way possible, because I'm not going to go into this in this video, is when you're doing animation like a relay, for example, and this is just really rough, do something like go every 5 frames ideal, 10 frames if you really want to block it out really roughly, but just block out what you want your animation to do. So for example, frame 10, I want him to have his hand on the magazine. So it's blending here because I have, it's I say, it's set up to blend between these two positions. But what you can actually do also in Blender is when you select your keyframes, you can press T and go to constant. And what you'll see is it will snap between. Obviously, that doesn't look great, but it's good for what's called blocking out, where you just want to get the main poses done. So, for example, there you go, the hand on the mag. I'm not going to set it up properly, but just imagine the mag's attached to the hand here. So, hand on the mag comes out, then frame 30, mag goes back to be put away. So, grab out, put away, and then you can just, in this very rough instance, just copy the first frame for the hand position to go back to the grip. And there you go. That looks not great, right? But the whole point is you're blocking out and then you refine as you go. So in fact, I will do it just as a little showcase. So I'll then switch that back to Bezier, which is blending. So if you actually no, I'm not going to explain that because it's not relevant for the time being. But you can then go to frame 5, for example, and then go like, right, I want the hand to come off at the at side when he releases it from the grip, and then it goes onto the mag, and then the mag comes out, and I want him to curve the magazine away, and then you just need to refine it over and over and over constantly. The better you get animation, you'll be able to do these in sort of one smooth move. You might even be able to block out as you go. I've sometimes done animations that way, where if it's not too complex of an animation, I will just effectively freeball it. I'll have the idea in my head of where things go and just go from there. But all you need to do is just block it out and just slowly refine and improve it. The best advice I can give in this situation, especially when you're working with importing it into an engine, like for example in Fusion, is that you can just, it's free. You can keep importing it into the game and keep watching how it works. doing the workbench and fusion side of things is already complicated. There's no denial. I've spent a lot of time playing around and just trying to get things to work properly. Um, in addition to already doing the animations itself. But you can just import and check over and over and over again. If your PC can handle it, I run my setup so I have Blender running, I have GitHub running, so I can, easily see and revert changes and things for the project I'm working on. And then I have Workbench running, and I have them all running at the same time. So I can do a tweak in the game in Blender, sorry, import it and see how it looks. It's very useful for things like, in some instances, animations won't be completely one-to-one. I've still not worked out if this might be something you can change by changing like import compression inside the engine. I'm not sure. But for example, there are some things like really subtle weapon movement. You might not see it. It might not register properly. So you might have to exaggerate the animation a bit. For example, if I want the gun to let's just pretend and say I want it to like dip in his arm. If I do it like this, it's a tiny movement, right? And you can see it in Blender. In fact, if I just quickly, you can see it in Blender, right? You can see it dropping down just there. But that might be too small to properly export and register in the game. Now, there probably are ways to, get this to work. Um, but I'm still not entirely sure. I think it might just be a result of the import process and it not doing such really fine-grained animations. For the most part, everything you do should come through fine. It's just really subtle animations, and a great way to just check and see that is, you export it straight in and see what it looks like. What you may have to just end up doing is you may just have to exaggerate it a bit more in Blender. So obviously it might look really silly in here in some situations, but then when it's in game and everything's, all the blending between animations and stuff is happening, it might then actually look how you want it to. It might then look like that little small movement originally. So that's one of the really big positives of being able to just really easily export into the engine and just check. That's all you need to do. You just need to, just compare, export it in, see how it looks, and you can then adjust it. It's a lot more work if you sit here and build and complete the entire animation and then go back, I would say, and then you're constantly tweaking it over and over again. I just find it easy to block it out and get the main poses done, and then as you refine it, you can go through stages and re-import it and then see how it comes out. Just trying to think of what else I can go through on Blender here. There's nothing really, because I don't want this video to be a sort of behind the scenes on how animation works. I mean, this is already a one-shot take video. It's up to 47 minutes now, and I'm just going to be rambling otherwise. But it's just a case of practicing. Watch normal Blender tutorials for animation. A lot of it will still apply. Obviously, you're still working with the Arma rig, but normal view model animation tutorials will still apply. In fact, a lot of this is still set up the way I did view model animating. So, you have the magazine. In this case, it's attached to the character rig, but then you just, you attach that prop left bone to the weapon, and then you can just animate the hand, and then you can change the parenting of the magazine prop bone to then be parented to the hand. One thing I would massively suggest is you download the dynamic parent add-on for Blender. Unfortunately, currently Blender has no dynamic parenting built in. It will do in the future, but it won't be for some time. This allows you to snap the hands to the weapon. So, for example, you can see the hands there moving with the gun. You can do that in Blender already by using bone constraints. But it's just made so much easier. I don't have to go in here. I don't have to then create a new constraint and then select which bones with these drop-down menus are being used and whatnot. I can just select this bone, select this, select the prop bone, and then hang on. Let me just do this actually as a good example. And then if I just select the prop bone and the hand bone, and I go to dynamic parent and click create, that should be the right way around. Yep, there you go. Now the magazine is parented to the hand. If you do use dynamic parent, something to note, you can then attach it back and use dynamic parent again. I wouldn't recommend this because you'll end up creating loads of these constraints here, so you'll have a massive list of them because it creates a new one every time you create and attach. So I wouldn't keep doing that create function. When you do disable, it will just turn the keyframing off. But when you create a new one again, it will create a problem. So you can then just make use of the normal Blender function, or in this case, the dynamic parent, um, to detach it, for example. And oh, I think I actually had them selected to have it work. There you go. And then detach it again. And that will just change the influence. Um, Influence, that's Blender animation tutorials. That's what you want to go and watch. It's not just like oh hey, this is an Arma specific thing. This is this animation now, and Blender specifically. So I think that kind of wraps it up. That's really the bare bones of what everything does and how it works. Obviously, I've gone over some things that are already on the wiki, some things I haven't. It should hopefully save you from having to go through a lot of Discord posts and things like that. There are a lot of things, you know, that can be done. One of the great things about the new Infusion engine is just how much easier this all is. Back in the day, if I remember correctly, it was text files, uh, and this was a lot more painful to work with in Arma 3, for example. So it is incredibly powerful what you can do. It can be a headache. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say, oh yeah, it's really easy to work with and there's no problems at all. I've spent a lot of hours problem solving and, finding ways to fix things that either might not be documented or in some instances like that right hand jittery thing I mentioned earlier on, where you don't want to use the right hand for animations when you can. Um, I discovered that and did a lot of testing and things with that, so that was quite painful and annoying to find out because it makes weapons like bolt actions quite complicated, um, or at least you can't achieve the same level of quality as you can with other animations that use the left hand. Um, or you can, but it's really hard to. But anyway, I'm divulging where I shouldn't need to. Uh, but yeah, there are things that cause a lot of headaches, but it's fairly straightforward. And whilst I've not actually done it yet, as far as I know, Unreal works in a kind of similar way. I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that. But it will probably working in Infusion is probably a great way to actually, well, practice getting something into an engine. I was just view model animating before, and then when I jumped over to doing this instead, it means I'm actually putting my work into an engine, which is a great thing for anyone who's an animator. It's a great thing to showcase on a portfolio that you can actually do in-engine work. So yeah, I would just say hop in, practice, play around. Um, if you have any problems, the Arma Discord and the animation Infusion animation channel is a great place to go. A lot of helpful people in there. Um, we've all been there. We've all had these same problems, so it's worth searching as well to see if your problem has probably likely come up already. There's not a lot now, I don't think, that people haven't done yet. So yeah, definitely search in there first because your question probably has been answered many, many times. But yeah, it's just a case of hopping in and playing and practicing, and you will get into the swing of things. It will become a lot easier as time goes on with anything. Um, so yes, in 52 minutes and 50 seconds, that I think is a sort of crash course on the animation editor and how sort of all these things work. So hopefully this helps someone. I made this as a very spur of the moment thing in case people needed help. It's very messy, I'm aware, so apologies for that, but there we go.